Okay, I'll start again. Yeah, I'm Yacob Mulugetta. I'm the partnership lead of the Climate Compatible Growth Program in here in the UK. And thank you very much for all of you speakers for accepting to be here with us. Well, this is the first of many side events that CCG is organizing over the next 3 days. The session today is entitled "The Ecosystem for Change." The session will focus on partnerships and co-created research, and we will highlight some of the international partnership activities in this session today. Just a little bit about CCG. No doubt it will begin to emerge in this conversation. Well, CCG, Climate Compatible Growth Program, is an action-oriented research program that aims to provide timely evidence and decision support tools that help influence how developing countries can respond to low-carbon transition while also delivering on their development goals. CCG brings together a core partnership of leading universities in the UK and other partners, all with a track record of impact excellence. CCG's approach is underpinned by the building of strong national partnerships, as well as partnerships with organizations that have expertise in international development and a variety of areas around low-carbon development transitions. Some of these international partners are represented here today. So the session in this session, we will have each speaker will speak for 8 to 10 minutes, followed by chair-guided Q&A. The program will kick off with a video recording of Charlotte Watts, who is the Chief Scientific Advisor of the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Organization. Thank you.
Welcome to the first session of an exciting 3 days of events at Strathclyde University. The 3 days will cover a rich set of topics at the intersection between climate and economic development. I'm really sorry that I won't be able to attend in person, but look forward to hearing the outcomes in due course. I want to particularly give my thanks to the CCG for organising the event, and want to welcome all of the partners taking part, including those from other FCDO-supported research programs, other parts of government, BEIS, and the Energy Transition Council, for example, the great range of MDBs that we have represented, as well as many other partners from around the world, from both the global north and south. Climate change is the most significant challenge that the world faces. The UK's integrated review sets out a strategic vision to put science and technology at the heart of our alliances and partnerships worldwide, and as part of our commitment to both international development and tackling extreme poverty, as well as to support climate action. We want to generate the evidence and innovations needed to help developing countries take a path of low carbon development, while simultaneously unlocking profitable investment in green infrastructure, and particularly in energy and transport, the focus of much of the discussion over the next few days. Climate and economic growth are core priorities for our Foreign Secretary. We know that growth is the only route to long-term poverty reduction for developing countries, but this growth has to be sustainable and avoid locking countries into high carbon pathways. To do this, we have to deploy the low carbon technologies that are rolling out globally in transformative ways. In this meeting, we have a major opportunity to help shape the development trajectory in our partner countries over the next few decades to make it clean, green, and inclusive. CCG is FCDO's flagship R&D program to help drive this transformation. The model aims to align world-class research with practitioners and policymakers to ensure that the right evidence and tools get into the hands of the right people at the right time to help them make the right decisions and investments. CCG's models is also about building partnerships working with others to co-create research and build communities of practice that think and act differently on the climate challenge. You'll see that we've got big ambitions on a critical agenda. To make progress, we need strong collaboration and to bring in a range of voices, experience, and expertise. So please stick around for the 3 days and find ways that you can join the movement and partner with us on this journey. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the meeting.
Well, I should say thank you to Charlotte, even if in absentia. So now we turn to Jim Watson, who's sitting next to me. Jim is the research lead of the CCG program, as well as Professor of Energy Policy at University College London. Jim, over to you.
Thanks very much, Yacob. I hope you can hear me okay. The microphone's coming through. Could we have the slides up, if that's all right? Or do I just need to press a button? I think something's happening. So I'm going to talk, just while these come up, I'm going to talk a bit more about the CCG Research Program, some of the work we've done already. Yeah, that's working. And some of the plans we've got as well through this program. So I think we've already had quite a lot in terms of introduction about what the Climate Compatible Growth Program is designed to do. As Charlotte Watts just said, it is ambitious in terms of what it's seeking to achieve, in terms of working with partners in low and middle income countries to build that capacity to help them plan low carbon infrastructure, particularly in the energy and transport sector. So that's really what the main thing is for it to do. And I think, as both speakers already have said, you know, a lot of that work is going to be done through partnerships, either with researchers and other organizations within those countries or with international organizations. And there's a real emphasis, as it says at the bottom of this slide, and I'll give some examples in a moment, on global public goods. So making data, tools, and other capabilities accessible for researchers, for analysts, for governments in those lower middle income countries. And hopefully so that it builds that enduring capacity in those countries, which has been so elusive in the last few decades. There's been many attempts to build that capacity, and we're trying to do this now in a new way. So I'm going to just give you a little overview in a few minutes of the research program. This is the core research program, which is quite a lot of what the CCG program is doing. It's characterized by these 3 work streams, as we call them, which is in the diagram here in blue and red and purple. The one at the top, called work stream 3, quite confusingly, is called system design. And that's very much about using models and tools to help developing countries to plan, I suppose, the pathway towards low carbon infrastructure development to support that poverty reduction aim that Charlotte Watts mentioned. So there's a lot of international models being developed and applied and shared through that. Workstream 4 at the bottom left there is called sector interactions, and that's very much looking at the interactions not only between energy and transport, the 2 sectors that we have, but actually looking at how those sectors interact with other systems, whether it's about their water use, whether it's about their use of critical materials, whether it's about some of the risks that are impacting on those infrastructures due to climate impacts. Remember that many of the countries we are working with are those that are feeling the sharpest climate impacts already, and that has to be built into the way in which we do our analysis. And then workstream 5 at the bottom right there is about policy and economics. Really, it's all very well doing lots of technical modeling, but in the end, if you don't have a good understanding of the economics of change and the policies needed to change and the politics of change, then actually getting a lot of this to work in practice is not going to be possible. So we have a whole work stream working on that area. As it says on the slide, we've made quite a big start on many projects. We've got 17 on the go already, and a lot of emphasis on integration to make sure that we don't work in silos in those work streams. We've really emphasized collaboration, and that's something you're going to hear a lot about over the next 3 days. These are just some examples on the slide here about the collaborations that CCG is already involved in. I'm not going to go into them in detail because actually most of them are subject of other sessions in our series over the next 3 days. So there's something on green grids. You'll hear some quite big announcements at COP about the Green Grids Initiative and the role of international grids in particular in helping countries decarbonize. The rapid response facility, I think we're going to talk about that later in the series as well, is, it's how do you actually get the evidence that governments need to make decisions quickly. And that's bringing together basically a world of academia, which often works on slower timescales, together with the needs of decision makers, which often need a result or a decision in a few days. So that's one way in which we're trying to bridge that gap. Evidence for COP26, that's going to be the subject of session 2. And then there's collaborations with 2 development banks we've been working with, in particular, Asian Development Bank and the World Bank Group. And again, we'll talk more about those as we go through this session. And then finally, the electromobility think piece for Some for All. That's an alliance on clean transport. I think that's going to be talked about in much more detail this afternoon. I've mentioned the global public goods and the emphasis on that, and that's really important. Here is just a few examples. So we've already put on the web freely accessible data starter kits, as we call them. So that's allowing analysts to understand basic data about energy systems and then use fairly easy to access models to explore energy futures. So there's a lot of information and data already online that can be easily accessible. We've had global summer schools. They've been running for some time, a very large one this summer as well. In these times of COVID, of course, that's been largely online. And then a roundtable initiative on strategic energy planning, trying to support developing country governments with how energy planning could be put into practice and agreeing some principles about the process for that as well. So there's just some examples. I'm just going to finish with a little bit more detail. I've only got a couple of minutes left on a few of the projects we're embarking on, just to give you a flavour of some of the work that we're doing. So from the workstream 3, that's the system design workstream, we're working particularly with Kenya in the first year or so of CCG. One of the models we're using is called Osmosis. That's an open source energy modeling system. It's been applied to many, many countries around the world, and it's relatively easy to use and to learn compared to some other models. There's some work going on now to adapt that for Kenya and actually work with the Kenyan Ministry of Energy and Kenyan researchers on energy planning to help support that. And that's going to feed directly into some of their planning work that they're doing, their medium-term plan, but also the revision of their nationally determined contribution for the UNFCCC. There's some parallel research actually going on also in political economy. So again, to understand not only the technical changes that might be needed, but actually how do you put them into practice? And the how do you put them into practice has a lot to do with the institutions and the policies required. And that requires analysis and research too, to understand that and to develop the options that you want to pursue. Second example from our workstream 4, that's on the sector interaction. So this is about materials. You won't be able to read the graph because it's very small, but basically it's an analysis of what happens when African countries, I think it's a large number of African countries in this analysis, shift towards low carbon technologies for electricity generation. And what does that mean for material use and for the carbon footprint of that use? And there we've got a set of results. You probably can't see the detail between the 1.5 degree pathway, the 2, and the business as usual, but there are some significant differences in material use. But one thing it really emphasizes is the need for material resource efficiency. We can't just switch from one set of materials to another without thinking about resource efficiency, recycling and reuse. And that's really important in the low carbon world as much as it is in the high carbon world. And then finally, this has a lot of words on it, this slide, which you're welcome to read at your leisure, but this is the economics and policy work stream, and really I put this up just to emphasize that all our work is not just on the transport and energy sectors themselves, but it's how do they fit into the broader economies of low and middle income countries. So there's work on aligning economic recovery with the investment in climate compatible growth, on planning and thinking about some of the jobs and sectoral benefits that could come from switching to low carbon infrastructure, and then the role of innovation and how some of that innovation can be brought into those lower middle income countries as well. So that's just a flavor of a few of our projects, and I think I'm going to leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Jim. Shall we clap? Thank you. Just to emphasize, collaborations, partnerships, but also what Jim has highlighted is just scratching the surface of what really is happening within CCG. Quite a lot of work is already underway since the program began in January. So now I turn to Huang, who is Director of Division of Energy Planning, Information and Knowledge Management at the International Atomic Energy Agency. along with Ms. Loreta Stankeviciute, a colleague of Huang. And the discussion this morning is, their session is going to be on open tools and capacity building. And this is something that they've been doing for quite some time in terms of bringing in modelers as well as energy planners for training at the IAEA, and that's been happening for over a decade. So it'll be a pleasure to welcome you in person. And over to you, Huang.
Thank you very much. Thank you, CCG, for inviting agency to participate in this event. Actually, this is one of the dozen events IAEA is going to engage in this COP. So I think it's our pleasure to be here to share some information about how agency cooperate and partner with international partners in supporting member states to achieve their targets in climate change combat and clean energy transition. So for those people who not familiar with the agency is an intergovernmental organization specializing in nuclear. It's a part of the UN system, but we are independent. So agency was founded in 1957. So this is a brief history of the agency. Regarding this topic, I think among all these different agencies programs, energy planning is very special because they start from the purpose of how we can support our member state to develop their nuclear power and have that deployed in their countries. But for that purpose, and then after that, this activity has been expanded to non-nuclear area because we find out this is very useful for countries to develop their national energy policy based on the fact, based on the science. So that's the reason we actually make a lot of efforts to develop up different analytical tools in cooperation with our international partners. So agency energy planning actually start from 1970s. So gradually we expand our tools to cover very broad spectrum from energy demand to energy system alternatives, and also the economic analysis and also the financial implication of the system. So this is quite a broad spectrum which benefit all our member states. We have quite a number of tools distributed among our 150 countries and also used by more than 20 international organizations. So we believe this is a very important area we can continue to work our partners to support member states to achieve their climate change target and also clean energy transition. So because today this presentation is going to be jointly delivered by me and Loreta, so I will suggest that Loreta will continue that to share the more detailed information with the audience. So Loreta, please.
Thank you, Huang. Thank you, Yacob, and thank you very much, CCG, for inviting us to this important event. So as Huang mentioned, really agency, regarding the energy planning, agency has some years, around 50 years already history behind, and we were sort of the pioneers in this area, in energy planning, capacity building for energy planning. Yes. And the main, let's say, key message that we always wanted to convey, and we still want to convey, is that agency is not there to do something for member states. Yes, we are there to support them, to provide them with tools, to train them how to use those tools, so that basically countries themselves, the experts themselves, are capable to analyze their future energy strategies, are capable to do this analysis by ourselves. So this national expertise is always a core in our implementation of the project. In this way, we also indirectly support the decision making and policy making in these countries. What are the main elements, let's say, of this capacity building program in the agency? So we have our own set of analytical tools, for which we are basically responsible in terms of enhancements, in terms of developments. and the training on these tools is an integral part of our capacity building program. So this training can take many different forms. It can be a distance training, it can be in-person training, it can be a national, regional workshop. It can also be fellowships, for example, where national experts come to the agency or visit some other institutions that are capable of delivering this training in their regions. For us, what is important is that the team, the national team, when it engages with that, it's that it stays under constant training for 2 years or more, depends how long it engages with us. We also in our capacity building program, we also provide technical assistance for producing energy studies, national or regional, or developing plans, master plans, and so on. We also maintain information references in terms of energy and economic data, and we also try to explain to our member states the compatibility of nuclear technology and other technologies and nuclear technology in terms of capacity building and climate change mitigation goals. So this is basically the core of our capacity building program. So these are the tools, and they are designed to cover all various stages of energy planning. From energy data, statistics, compilation of energy balances, the EBS tool, that's where usually the country starts with, because the baseline statistics is the foundation of good planning and as an input also to energy modeling. MIET model helps you to analyze your future energy needs. A message model is a full-scale techno-economic optimization model that helps you to analyze your supply options. ESST model is another energy system analysis model based on the energy balance concept. It also provides hourly analysis, which is very relevant for renewable analysis these days. WAS probably is our oldest model in use, and it is meant for power generation. It's only focused on power generation, expansion, and operation. And we have some more, let's say, specific tools such as SIMPAX, FinPlan. One is for environmental impact assessment, and the other one is for financial feasibility. So these are sort of recent examples of our capacity building projects here. So, for example, okay. I have 1 minute left, so it's really, the slides will be there. So in case anyone wants to. This is also just an example. These are the key messages that I really wanted to mention in this presentation, that this capacity building is not a sole effort. It has to be done in partnership with other organizations. We have a number of them, including intergovernmental organization IRENA, UN organizations, academia, research organizations, OpTIMUS, community, CCG, and many others. Also pool of experts. And what is important again is this local expertise that I wanted to emphasize in this presentation, but no time. These are the schools that are listed here. For some reason not visible. There are links also there, that we also try to train to expand this pool of energy planners here, and to promote also these open source models with our partners that are also listed in these and I give in these figures.
Yeah,
and I give.
I know time is constrained, so the last sentence is just in the past 2 days, our DG has a very good, fruitful discussion with the international partner. You see the Damilola, the head of the C4, co-chair of UN Energy, and also the Energy Transition Council, and also the DG of IRENA. Actually, they have a very fruitful discussion on how we can continue our cooperation in the energy area to support the member state in this kind of energy transition process. So we will continue to have this conversation in the coming 2 or 3 days. So hope we can get a more fruitful result. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will come back again. We
Yes.
will have the opportunity to
Great.
with the Q&A in a little bit. But so now let me turn to Asami Miketa, who is a senior program officer at the International Renewable Energy Agency, who will be talking to us about collaboration via a roundtable process. Now, this is our online colleague, and Asami, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Terrific.
I was told that I will be able to control the slides from my end, but I do not see that option yet.
The slides.
Sorry?
Okay, they're putting them on.
Yes.
Asami, just a moment.
Yeah. Okay. I just see that we don't recognize this presenter. Please check the link that you will give. So maybe, yes, yes. So I will just start. Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for inviting IRENA to join this important event. I am leading the energy planning team at IRENA Innovation and Technology Center in Bonn. And the goal of IRENA's energy planning support is to help IRENA member countries in improving renewable energy representation in regional and national master plans. Next slide, please. And we are one of the signatories of the key principles of energy planning, strategic energy planning. And this process has been running, I think, last 3 years. And from the beginning, we are the strong supporter of these principles. I'm not gonna elaborate the principles because I believe that there will be a session dedicated to this launching of these principles in the coming sessions. But I just want to mention that this document sets out 5 key principles, and they are like a code of conduct for development partners to work collectively towards improved and effective support of energy planning in the respective member countries. And we support these principles because they are consistent with how IRENA operates energy planning supports. And we clearly see great impacts coming from these support activities and that are fully aligned with these principles. Next slide, please. So IRENA's energy planning support activities have 2 pillars, and one of the 2 pillars is institutional capacity building. And our approach focuses on establishing the ownership of planning skills, transferring the transparent methodology, and promote the use of robust data, and in particular, the use of very good renewable energy data. And ownership of the skill is particularly important because it helps to internalize the planning process, and it can keep the relevant planning documents updated. Next slide, please. So instead of talking theoretically, I decided to just use one recent example from our training program that we conducted with the Central African Power Pool. And it touches upon key aspects of energy planning principles. So I would like to briefly describe what we did. So the program ran for 2 years, and we are now at the closing stage of the program. And we invited many of the partners there at the final presentation of the participants that we organized last month. And the program was targeted the countries that belong to the Central African Power Pool, and we spent more than a year designing the program together with the Secretariat of the Central African Power Pool, and established a process of creating the working team of 11 country teams through formal channels of IRENA membership. And this long, elaborated process ensured the national ownership of the capacity building activity. And IRENA has developed power sector model called SPLAT model for every continental African countries, and that is built based on the IAEA's modern software message. So the models are fully calibrated for regional power pool master plans, and IRENA's resource and technology dataset is fully incorporated. And using these models as a starting point, this addressed the robustness of the planning methodology. And then using these, IRENA provides training focusing on updating the model and developing the scenarios of their interest. We provided the training hours, and this ensures good planning capacity is built. And we also focus the training on model updates, database maintenance, and scenario development in a transparent and replicable manner. So this was a regional program, and for national program, more focus is placed on building institutional framework around establishing a planning process. Next slide, please. So the first pillar of IRENA's energy planning support activity was institutional capacity building. Now the second pillar is promotion of peer-to-peer learning. And we support this through the network of scenario practitioners in the government sector. And this is targeted to countries that have established scenario-based planning practices already. And even the countries that do not necessarily need to take part in capacity.
Asami,
Yes.
we've
Yes.
got 3 minutes, please. 2.5 minutes.
Yes, I think I'm good.
Okay.
And so even the countries that do not necessarily need to take part in capacity building, there's always a need to keep strengthening the planning capacity to reflect new challenges and opportunities associated with clean energy transition and clean climate growth. And we organized more than 30 dialogue events over the last 3 years. And under the LTS network, we discussed government planning practices around how they develop scenarios, how they use scenarios for policy making, what are the types of capacity that governments have in scenario-based planning, and what approaches that they use to strengthen it. And I just want to highlight that we organized a very interesting webinar series featuring 14 Latin American countries, which we concluded earlier this year, and we are going to replicate that similar webinar focusing on African countries later this year. So we are going to feature 10 African countries. And also we just started, yesterday we had the first session of the webinar series that features planning practices from 14 new members and partners of the LTS network. So yesterday we had speakers from Cyprus and Portugal, and they both presented the inclusivity and participatory process in the scenario planning process. And that was very important in the planning process. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So IRENA has already been practicing the partnership with various institutions that are other signatory of the key principles. So here I collected some pictures from past events that we organized in partnership with other institutions. So here we included a picture that we organized events with ECLI, IAEA, UNFCCC, UNECA, and I would also like to acknowledge particularly strong relationship that we have established with the IAEA over the past years. Next slide, please. And we also work with GIZ and USAID. I just wanted to highlight that maybe you can see from the dates of this event, these collaborations started even before the roundtable process. And we believe that we see a great value in cooperation with other partners through the roundtable process and sharing experiences. For example, we hosted the 5th roundtable discussion at IRENA headquarters back in 2020. And it was a great exchange of experience and insight among the partner institutions. The last slide, please, the next slide. So
Hi,
I would
Masami.
like,
Please
yes.
wind down. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna wind down, yes. So I would like to conclude this intervention with an example of what we can achieve collectively when we put our forces together. So IRENA and IAEA has been chosen as a modeling partner of the African Continental Master Plan development, and the SPLAT and message model was designated as official modeling tools to be used for the Continental Master Plan. So I just wanted to highlight that this program is a very complex program, as many institutions will bring its resources and complement its strengths. So we make significant effort in coordination. And I think this is a great example of cooperation among institutions and application of the principles. So with this, just wanted to say IRENA is committed to support the energy planning principles, and we promote them by showing the good example. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asami. we will come back here to more questions, and you will have further opportunity to develop your ideas, share some more thoughts. So now we turn to Nicolina Lindblad, and I guess, Nicolina, you are calling from, I'm not sure, Washington. If it is, then thank you for waking up in these ungodly hours. Nicolina is an energy geographer at the World Bank, and will be talking to us about the collaboration of the World Bank via the OpTIMUS initiative. Over to you, Nicolina. You have 8 minutes.
Thank you very much. I will try to not speak too quickly, but still cover the content of my slides. So yes, as mentioned, my name is Nicolina Lindblad. I'm an energy geographer with the World Bank and SMAP. And I first of all wanted to thank everyone for that organized this event and bringing us here together, and also in inviting us as organizations to take part of the discussions. To answer your question, I'm actually not calling in from DC, then I would be up very early. I'm calling in from Sweden. I think it's a lag, but I think you have my next slide up. So I'm coming here sort of in the capacity of one of the GEP core members from the World Bank and SMAP side. And for you that aren't familiar with the GEP, it stands for the Global Electrification Platform, and it has been developed by a consortium of actors, some of which are highlighted on the screen here, and many of which are core members of the OpTIMUS community. And the GEP is very much based on the same, if not or similar principles as the OpTIMUS community operates under. And I wanted to take a step back and give you a short story how the GEP first came about, as it pinpoints some of these key principles. So a few years ago, when we were heavily relying, or starting to rely on, I should say, on GIS-based energy models, the requests from our clients followed this trend. And back then, we needed to rely completely on external consultants to provide these least cost electrification analysis to our clients. So we, as an organization, asked ourselves, is there a way that we can do this in a more resource and time efficient manner? As these other models were heavily relying on license-based softwares and proprietary data and softwares. So when we were asking ourselves this question, we started to also initiate conversations with other organizations and individuals that we knew were asking themselves the same question, or that we thought in one way or another could be part of the solution. And these conversations materialized into partnerships, and that is essentially how the GEP was born. Fast forward to September 2019, and the first version of the GEP was officially launched. And now, 2 years later, we had just launched the second version. And that sort of that means that we are now in the phase of preparing phase 3 of the GEP. So making this intervention very timely in a sense, and I will look back to this in a second. Very quickly, this slide is sort of highlighting the aim of the GEP, which is to elevate the starting point for universal electrification access work globally. We want it to aspire partnerships and collaborative efforts, as mentioned in the opening remarks, that we walk away from working in silos and to leveraging each other's efforts. Some animations here. Jumping to the next slide. So for those of you that are familiar with the Global Electrification Platform, the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the GEP is probably this shiny interface that you see on the screen and that you find under electrifynow.energydata.info. And that provides you for all the 58 countries across the globe that experience the highest electrification poverty currently, you will get suggested 96 pathways per these countries of how they could achieve universal access. But the GEP has much more to offer. And in the upcoming slides, I will quickly touch upon some of these aspects. So the power of data, or perhaps the power of the GEP, lies in the data in one way or another. And from the GEP, you're able to extract data on settlement levels, where a settlement refers to a cluster of buildings, a village, a city, or a town, up to GEP Global, where GEP Global refers to the 58 countries included in the GEP. And it expands beyond the output data. It also, we have made all the input data to 95%, I must say, publicly available, so that anyone operating in this field can also leverage the underlying GEP data. And this is an example of how we can quickly crunch a high level indication from the GEP. So this is the estimated investment requirement to achieve universal access across sub-Saharan Africa. The price tag based on the GEP baseline scenario is about 191 billion USD. And this high-level insight is made available based on the GEP results.
Please.
And I didn't hear the time, but I think I have a few more
2 minutes. Thank you.
2 minutes. Thank you. So this slide here is sort of highlight the importance of partnerships. So we have the GEP is an example of an open tool. There are many more out there that are great. What we need now is more open data. And leveraging on an example from the GEP, the range from the lowest scenario to the highest scenario in terms of financial requirements ranges between 78 to 481 billion USD. That means that these scenarios suggest a difference of 400 billion USD in investment to achieve universal access globally. And while it's driven by different demand assumptions, it also is highly driven by the underlying data. Hence, we need to assure that we have accurate data to feed these models to make sure that we are communicating the right results to our clients and those people that we serve. So just to say, there are many partnerships. We don't necessarily need more partnerships. We need more good partnerships. And data is an area that we think that we could continue to build strong partnerships about. In my two final slides, I wanted to just say that the GEP inherently promotes RE technologies. It is not a climate investment model today, but it has the framework to become one. So the model is out there, it's open source, so anyone can turn this into such tool. And we also are working on, as I mentioned earlier, the third version of the GEP, and this is, as you see on the screen, two of the main questions that we are currently asking ourselves. And I also wanted to invite anyone that would like to collaborate on this, meaning what is the climate impact of the current GEP scenarios and how we can also inform the models
Nicolina,
from...
we need to wind down, please.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
So I will go to
We'll come back, to more discussions. But
exactly. Miketa will cover the capacity building in the next intervention. But thank you so much, CCG and the OpTIMUS community for making us able to train at scale. And then thank you so much. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me and the team if you have further questions. When the slides are circulated, you have more resources on the bottom left. Thank you so much.
thank you, Nicolina. We haven't heard the last of you, so we'll come back again. Thank you. So now we're heading to UNECA. That's the UN Economic Commission for Africa. We have Miketa Paulos, who will speak to us. I guess you are in Addis. Are you, Miketa? Over to you. Talk about the African Modeling Platform.
Yeah. Hi, Yacob. Thanks
Hi,
again for having me.
Dominish.
Hello. A very good
Salam, no?
morning. Good. A very good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Unfortunately, no, I'm not in Addis. I'm actually in Saudi Arabia, deep in oil country. So we'll see how that pans out. But yes, let me start off. My name is Miketa Alas from the African Climate Policy Center of the UN Economic Commission for Africa. It is a pleasure to be here with you all at this event. The discussion here today coalesces around the need for effective partnerships and co-created research, which is at the very essence of the energy modeling platform for Africa that I will be speaking about. Also, and crucially, in light of the ongoing global energy system transformation and the need to accelerate the energy transition on account of climate change imperatives, reinforced partnerships and strengthened collaboration will undoubtedly be pivotal, as we have been hearing from all the speakers today. So the EMPA is a fairly new initiative of my organization, together with the wider OpTIMUS community, aimed at creating the critical mass of energy planning experts in African countries to support optimized investments in energy production and services so as to meet the continent's growing demand for sustainable, inclusive, and climate-resilient development pathways, capitalizing on its abundant energy resources. The idea for an energy modeling platform arose prior to COP21, driven by the deficit of capacity generally for energy modeling in Africa. We felt it was crucial to provide those working in the energy sphere with a better understanding of the energy landscape and how in particular the use of open source modeling and planning tools could help in addressing Africa's energy challenges. As Africa strives to meet, the considerable energy requirements of its rising population, attain the SDGs, and meet its industrialization imperative enshrined in Agenda 2063, the urgent need for strategic long-term energy planning could not be more essential. And moreover, the recent launch of the African Climate Free Trade Agreement earlier this year will only shift this energy demand into higher gear. And further, with climate action gaining even more credence amid the ongoing energy transition and growing calls for Africa to define net zero emission targets, this only lends weight to the need for closing the considerable deficit in human institutional capacity regarding effectively using these open source tools for energy supply, demand, investment planning, and management. And indeed, the energy planning investments, as we're all aware, the choices that we make today will determine development pathways for the next 30, even 40 years. And African countries are looking to strategically fashion their energy mix going forward without locking themselves into certain technologies that will not perform or end up investing in technologies that may be hard to finance, while concomitantly seizing the opportunities that clean energy technologies offer. We like to think that with every challenge comes an opportunity, which must be leveraged. Thus, it's pivotal that these decisions be made prudently and crucially with a long-term vision, as the lack of long-term energy planning is often cited as one of the primary deterrents to energy investments on the continent. So the EMP aspires to bridge that gap between Africa's modeling needs, given the need for evidence-based policymaking and its energy policy realities, by harnessing these open source modeling tools to support African energy analysts, researchers, academia, and by extension the government, as they analyze policies and challenges specific to their respective countries in such a way as to ensure their energy resources meet national imperatives. This last point I'd like to focus on is very key, as local ownership, and a couple of my counterparts have mentioned this before, local ownership really is key in this realm.
Two rounds of EM. We got 3 minutes, please.
I thought I had 8 minutes.
Yeah, you do. But you've got 3 minutes left. 4 minutes left, sorry.
Okay, 4 minutes left. Okay, I'll finish. Okay, I'll finish in 4. So 2 rounds of the EMP have taken place. First with Africa, with Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia, and next with the University of Cape Town in South Africa. And since its humble beginnings, we've seen a growing interest and participation and growing resounding calls for more dedicated sessions. This year we have over 100 applicants, I believe, which and the EMP actually began yesterday. And the modeling tools have been taken up at an impressive scale, more so than other regions. So there are sister EMPAs in places like Europe, Latin America. So it's really, really been great being part of this growing community. So specifically, the EMPA, just in the interest of time, its overarching objectives are to gather the energy planning and modeling community in Africa to share experiences, models, and data in climate, land, energy, and water systems, support policy coherence through human institutional coordination and capacity in Africa for integrated energy modeling and investment planning, support the development of centers of excellence for energy planning in Africa, and to promote the efficient and widespread use of open source modeling tools. We look at programs such as models such as Onset, Osmosis, that have been talked about before. I won't get into too much detail. FinPlan, the Energy Balance Studio, and of course CLUES, which looks at that integration and into linkages between the resource systems. Crucially, and I'd like to end on this point, the MPA is really about a collaboration of a myriad of institutions, primarily led by the ACPC, of course, at ECA, but also the World Bank, UNDESA, GIZ, IRENA, IAEA, and other academic institutions within the CCG program. We truly believe the need for effective partnership and synergizing efforts amongst like-minded institutions to draw on the expertise of both academia and international organizations. As Mark likes to say, it's at the very DNA of the EMPA, without which the MPA would not be a success. And crucially, we always try to co-host with an African academic institution to build that critical mass at the academia level. So we have that linkage between government institutions and academia to build a capacity and gain that critical mass of policymakers and technical experts. So it's really necessary to cast a wider net and involve as many stakeholders as possible in this endeavor, because we're all working towards the overall arching theme of low carbon, inclusive, and climate resilient development pathways, not just for the benefit of Africa, but also for the wider world. I will leave it at that at the interest of time, and happy to answer any further questions. Over to you, Yacob.
Thank you, Nicolina. That was. Thank you so much. That was packed with information, but also you managed to squeeze in all of that in 7.5 minutes. That's well done. Thank you. So our next speaker is Arnaud Rouget, who's the lead of Africa program on outlooks and capacity building at the International Energy Agency. Over to you, Arnaud. You'll be talking about own country needs, cooperation, and open Africa data.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. I put my own timer, so I'm on 8 minutes, and I track that. Thanks a lot from CCG for having us here. It's a pleasure to speak and to discuss how to continue coordinating, joining forces on those key topics. So before I describe a bit more how the International Energy Agency is contributing to this ecosystem and trying to help drive clean energy transitions, and this goes under two main streams that I will describe in a second. Let me just take one step back and maybe coming with what could be a truism, but energy is very complex. It involves a large number of players. It's at the heart of everything: development, well-being, economy, climate, and the ongoing COP is again showing us that it's not that easy to understand what we hear. Like yesterday, there was an impressive pledge on reducing methane emissions by minus 30% by 2030. Well, where does that come from? Is it only oil and gas upstream? How does that help us in carbon neutrality? Basically, our executive director mentioned that according to our numbers, this target would save the same amount of CO2 as decarbonizing the entire transport sector globally. So removing all cars, all trucks, all planes, all ships, which are thermal as of today. And in the same kind of idea, we hear many pledges at COP, from what I have been able to follow, interesting pledges on the share of renewables in power. Kenya targeting 100% renewables power by 2030, Egypt above 42. We also hear net zero emissions by 2030 plans from Rwanda, from Morocco. Nigeria made one for 2060. But all that to come to the point that I think that if we want to get a full understanding of our energy landscape, we need an integrated approach. And this is something that was raised right at the beginning of this session, is that integrated all fuels, all technologies views is really required to understand and then to act. And basically, this is what the IEA has been trying to do. So maybe, as you may know, IEA comes from some very specific oil security focused topic right at the beginning of its mandate 50 years ago. But from there, IEA expertise has expanded to all the fuels, to all the steps of the energy system: demand, supply, transformation, looking at all technologies with a lot of data and a lot of granularity. but also expanding to topics such as minerals that will be required in energy transitions, jobs and consequences for people if we have plans to boost some sectors of the economy and to reduce others, and also macroeconomy, working increasingly with key partners like International Monetary Fund to understand retroactive loops when we take some assumptions in our model. And all this work at the IAEA has been initially done for our own mostly OECD members, but it's increasingly done for the benefit of all countries. We have a very strong relation with India, with South Africa, with Morocco, and many more. And this, I would say, rely on some concrete tools, which usually are our reports. And these are based on a very disaggregated, developed, and complex model that we have in-house, which is our world energy model. And from this model, what we're able to do is to develop some like roadmaps for the world to be net zero by 2050. Looking regionally, we had one more specifically on India, which might have helped the government to take also a very strong pledge for net zero by 2050 yesterday at COP. We are increasingly developing some country roadmaps. So once was done for China, once was done for net zero in the power sector in the G7 group. But we know that those reports and the policy advice we can bring to some governments is relevant for some regions of the world, but for others, this is not enough, because from what we observe, and looking more specifically at Africa, of course, there are a lot of skills, capacities, capable policies, capable systems, especially in the power sector. But when we look at the integrated energy system, we all observe that there is, I think, a need to support more with the basics, which to us are statistics and modeling tools, planning tools. And I think this is all what we've been working on in this group. But just to mention a bit what IEA achievements have been so far. When it comes to statistics, there's been again a lot of coordinated work with the UN, with others, for IEA and others to train statisticians. When it comes to Africa, it's usually done with AFREC under the Africa Union, but we also are increasingly developing some regional focus. We just issued a report on Western Sahel, looking at countries for which we did not have reliable data, and worked a lot with them on reinforcing those data and making them public to everyone. And when it comes to modeling, we have also a number of capacity reinforcement programs, especially with 10 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. So far, those activities have been mostly online, but we are very keen to start doing some direct activities. But what I like to focus on for the last minute I have is not describing in details our programs, but more the need for coordination and our willingness to join forces for this initiative, because IEA, as I was saying, has this very strong, detailed in-house expertise and data which are available. But so far, we don't have any modeling tool off the shelf, whereas other organizations have some tools open source and already available to share with countries. So I think there are really complementarity on what we can develop working with governments. And then when it comes to open source, I think we all agree that license-based softwares have been a limitation to countries' capacity to develop their own vision of their future energy systems and to develop their policies. IEA he's moving, maybe too slowly, but still moving on making all its data and analysis more easily available. The latest World Energy Outlook 2021 was totally free, and we are really accelerating the dissemination of data. I'm stopping here, and again, happy to coordinate and join more forces with you all.
Thank you, Arnaud. Thank you for keeping your own time as well. So you don't get cheated over seconds and minutes. Thank you so much. Well, I mean, before turning to Mark Howell, who's going to be our last speaker, can I also propose to all speakers, just some questions have come up. You know, there are some popular questions in Slido. One is looking at, for the panel to expand on the problem of translating modeling tools into developing country context. So if you could reflect while Mark is delivering his talk, along with how the panel can explain linkages between capacity building, modeling tools, and the question of ownership at developing country level. So in a sense, it's about the tools and how that is taken up by developing countries, appropriated, owned, and also used. So Mark Howells is the CCG director, and also works, I can't really know anymore, works from Loughborough and Imperial equally. And am I right? 80-20, yes. Anyway, so Mark will be talking about one of his big passions, which is collaboration with academia. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much. And I'm standing in for Tom Alstad of UNDESA in New York, for whom this is very early in the morning. So Tom's very kindly going to provide input in another form. So thank you. My name is Mark Howells. I have the privilege to work with the organizations that have been presenting their talks here, as well as some of the world's best academics. And very, very keen to reach out and work with more. And somebody said that the thing at the heart of this is the quality of the partnership, not necessarily the quantity. And I'd like to describe that a little bit now. So there are three things that I'd like to talk through quickly. The first is a story for the sake of context. Unfortunately, the story is a little bit closer to the truth than perhaps we'd like it to be. The second is about the ecosystem that CCG, together with its partners, is helping to create. And the third, I'd like to talk a little bit about impact, real-world impact. So first, the story. Imagine a young mother in a rural part of Africa. She's about to give birth. This is in a place where there's no electricity, no fridge, no good anesthetics, and a whole bunch of other things. Very, very painful birth as a result. Her child is very lucky to survive. It's the case that he doesn't get all of the inoculations that many of us who have access to electricity do, because we have access to fridges, which can keep these things cool. He keep the medicines that are required cool. He gets through that. Many children don't. Many mothers don't. He grows up. He's a very, very smart school kid. Goes to a rural school. Again, no electricity, so no access to all of these cool gadgets and gizmos that many of our children are lucky enough to have access to. But he's very smart, and he pushes through. He goes home. His mom, when he gets home at the end of a school day, his mom's been out collecting wood for probably the last 4 or 5 hours. The house is filled with smoke. It's a pleasant smell and so on. It's a nice atmosphere. But he's going to grow up with a cough for the rest of his life. Over 1 million people every year die as a result of indoor air pollution from cooking and so on. And women and children spend hours every day as a norm in much of rural Africa just collecting wood to be able to provide those services. In the other time that she has available, she tries to do some subsistence farming. It's really irregular. Sometimes there's enough rain, sometimes there's not, and this is problematic for the home. This little boy goes on, and he gets to university, works really hard. University is difficult for him. First time he sees a whole bunch of this technology. He gets going, learns how to use a computer. It's difficult. He thinks, my word, I think it would be neat, as he learns about the role that energy and other things can play in development. It'd be nice to be able to get some pumping from my mom to expand the farming, and it would be nice to get electricity to the school and a whole bunch of other things that are just critical. Unfortunately, so he goes to his professor, says, I'd like to do this. This seems like a great idea. Professor comes back and says, well, be neat, but we don't have any of the teaching material required. I don't have any partnerships anywhere where we can get some of this stuff. And the tools that are available are expensive, anything up to $100,000 a pop, just to be able to do this analysis going from this micro level through to national level. But this young lad is determined. So he makes his way through into a job in the civil service. Very, very keen. He sees there's lots of potential, finds his way into a trade mission to Europe, let's say. And there are a lot of investors on the other side of the fence. They're very keen to invest in this particular country. And he says, well, we've got lots of things that are going on. We've got fertile land, we've got hydro resources, sun, wind, all kinds of things. Come and invest. And they say, okay, that's lovely, but what should we invest in? And, well, hydro. Okay, and what's the return on investment on that hydro? What are the risk profiles and so on? At which point he's completely stumped. So he goes back and he connects with folk at the IAEA, IAEA, IRENA and others, and they arrange a training course and really good things go on, and he builds a team. And this team is great, okay? But the problem is because they're great, within a very short period of time, and they get upskilled or they start to develop a national model and so on, but within a short period of time, they're all promoted and they're out of that system, and this country has to start from scratch again. So that's the story. And as I say, unfortunately, there are elements of every bit of that story that come from instances that I can talk about. So partners, together with CCG, are developing these free open source tools, data kits that allow the system to be changed, online teaching material that can be absorbed into community programs. I just want the clicker quickly. There's a slide I want to put up. Let's see if that comes up. Online teaching material that can be absorbed into programs. Okay, doesn't matter. Okay, online teaching material that can be absorbed into programs. I think that's the fourth time I've said that, sorry. Together with things like the energy modeling platform for Africa and starter data kits and other things, so that entire ecosystem exists so that it is possible to build capacity in governments, build meaningful programs in universities, be able to tailor tools and efforts that are locally appropriate and nationally owned, but build the capacity between organizations to see this through. I want to end off with results. It's very nice to talk about these neat ideas and so on, but at the end of this set of events, you'll hear from the Minister of Energy from Cyprus and the Minister of Energy from Costa Rica, and there are others as well, where they've developed national university programs. They've taken part in our training programs, modeling work, which have been led by our international partners and supported by ourselves. And the analysis that they've done has gone on to ensure that infrastructure is invested in with national budgets, with multi-donor bank loans, with GCF applications, and others. And this is because all of the way from data through to policy development and integrated with political economy considerations, which are critical, it's been possible to put investment cases together that have resulted and are resulting in changes in investment. And this model is replicable, and it's only through the partnerships and processes that we have in place that we can spread this knowledge, make it scalable, but at the same time, if we're smart, we can do this in a way that the rules of the game change with these principles that you've heard about, and that the information that's generated is such that it can be assimilated much faster at a much greater scale to meet the needs that we have, which are critical. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. That was a nice way to end the session. I mean, the whole issue of data, information, knowledge, and how all that leads to practice and policy. So now we turn to our questions. And we had that question about translation of modeling tools in developing country context. And I just wonder if, given that where Loreta, you guys have had this experience for such a long time, how does this happen, and what are the sort of areas that those who are trying to, us, for example, what are the things that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I think in our first intervention, we mentioned that we already shared these tours among the 150 countries, more than 150 countries. And also we provide the technical assistance to help them to get familiar with all these tools application. And we also can provide some tailored technical service to the countries when they can using this tool to develop their case study at a national level and the regional level. But this really depends what they actually need, because agency, we have a principle we have been stick to in the past decades. That is, we try to be neutral, not give too much influence. Because from the very beginning, we started this energy planning because of the nuclear power. So then during the past decades, we try to make sure that we're not have an influence on their national policy decision. So that's why we keep a proper distance for that. But if country needs this kind of additional service on top of this tour application, so we can provide that service. But we have keep that principle all the time to make sure this. But Loreta can provide additional.
Yeah, I mean, just to maybe complement a little bit, as we also said that 90% of our recipients, they don't have anything to do, let's say, with nuclear power in their countries, no. But the main thing is that, okay, these models that we provide, they are cost-free models. Yeah, they can be tailored to. They can be tailored to any country, small country, big country, developed or developing country. We provide, as Wei mentioned, technical assistance training with these models. Yeah, but these trainings, of course, they increase the knowledge, the ownership of all these planning tools. But what Mark also mentioned, what is really important is that how to sustain all this afterwards. Yeah, so basically sustaining this local expertise is also an issue that we face. That is rotation of teams, promotion of very good staff. So this is very important that we with partners and put a lot of efforts on, let's say, how to sustain this local expertise. So this can be done with all the centers of excellences, academia, which is a very good repository for this local expertise. Yeah, so this is something that, again, it's not as I mentioned, it's not an effort of sole organization, but we have to do this all together, and this is what it's about. Yeah, this event is about partnerships and in building capacities. Yeah.
In addition, I also would like to add one point, that is we have been updating our tours in the past years, try to make sure the tour can be adaptive enough to the changing landscape, because now we are facing this the new situation, especially decarbonization of energy system globally. So these things have to be taken into account when we updating our tours to ensure this can be accommodated.
Yes, energy planning is not one-time effort. Yeah, so this is something that we need to know. It's time-consuming. It has to be repeated in time. It has to be refined in time to reflect the dynamics. Yeah.
Thank you, Loreta. Let me turn to colleagues in online. Maybe Asami and Miketa. I think the question of ownership, for example, could you reflect on this issue? I'll go with you, Asami, first, and then Miketa.
Yes, thank you very much. So I have mentioned about the regional training that we organized, and I mentioned that in the regional setting, we are not able to go into too much into detail of establishing the institutional capacity. So with a bilateral program, we can go into going into the building of institutional capacity, and that is kind of the key. We need to provide capacity to individuals, but on the top of this, to sustain this, like as it was mentioned by the IAEA colleagues, sustaining is important, and in order for us to be able to sustain, it has to be institutionalized. And in this regional training that we organized with Central African countries, at the end, many countries really appreciated what they learned, but they are really asking, like, how can we now institutionalize it? You know, there were only like 3 people trained from the country. They want to continue. They want to institutionalize. How can they do this? And this is actually the question that we have been addressing in this peer-to-peer learning platform that I mentioned, the LTES network, the Long-Term Energy Scenarios Network. That is a network of government scenario practitioners. And we are going to organize LTES webinar series featuring 10 African countries, which have successfully implemented establishing the institutional capacity for the planning. And there we specifically ask, please elaborate, what it took for them to build institutional capacity. And also, it's not just from Africa. We have been collecting this example from all around the world, including like Germany, Portugal, Cyprus. I mentioned yesterday there was a presentation from Cyprus and Portugal, and their approach were very different. Cyprus, they have very strong partnership with academics. Portugal, they decided to build modeling capability within the government. So there's no single best way, and we have really learned a great insights from different countries that the planning approaches are different. And also I wanted to highlight that in this LTS peer-to-peer learning process, we have been segregating the topic of modeling capacity and scenario-based planning capacity. These are not necessarily one and the same thing. From the academic perspective, they are the same thing, but from the government perspective, they are not the same thing. And by focusing on establishing the planning capacity built based on scenario, I think we got much more traction with the government planners. And we should not focus too much on like technicality of modeling tools, but I think it's really important to really discuss how the government can use the scenarios. They can build the scenario using their own modeling tool, but it's not the must. Some governments use external institutions, and how they organize this national ecosystem is really depending on how the relationship with academics, how the research organization is structured. So there's no single way of doing this, but the key is really to find the right institutional capacity building and type of capacity that is needed for the government.
Thank you. Thank you, Asami. Nicolina, over to you.
Thank you.
What do we do in Africa where, on the question of institutionalizing as well as ownership of these tools, knowledge products?
Yes, especially on the ownership, that's actually a very good question. And it's something that's very, very key, especially in light of the fact that, somebody talked about sustenance and, the longevity of this. That's the whole point, right? The long-term energy planning, it's not a short-term kind of 2-3-year endeavor. This is for keeps. It's long-term. And so within that, first of all, I think I mentioned this as well. It's free. It's very cost-free and accessible to anyone that's interested. Anyone that's interested to avail themselves of this training. And what we try to do is we try to cast, I mentioned this earlier, a wider net. So not just people in ministries, but academia. And that exactly is key. And that I think also helps the ownership angle, because you want to institutionalize this at a lower level, not just people working, after they finish school, working in ministries, but within academia, changing curriculums in universities and being able to get students before they graduate involved in the importance of energy planning. And that's actually another angle that we're looking at. There's not much time to get that into more detail, but that's another area that we're looking at as well. So the more you have more stakeholders, more you create that linkage, I believe, between the government, academia, and others. I think that will help in institutionalizing this and also getting the national ownership bit. And finally, it's important to get people plugged into the community, and there needs to be commitment. This is really key. At the end of the day, you can give the best technical assistance, you can provide, what's necessary, but there needs to be commitment also from the national governments. And as Asami mentioned, it's different. The way it happens in every country is different, and we try to localize it depending on their needs. And I would finally like to end on the note of what we do at the AMP. We like to think of training trainers, so getting them involved again, plug into the community, build that that's really, really key, because it's not just about someone being trained and helping the ministry in a certain country, but if you train trainers, you have that multiplier effect, and you have this kind of widespread diffusion of these open source energy tools, and that's a really, really key area that we're looking at as well. I'll just leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Miketa. Now, let me turn to you just quickly, Nicolina, and also Arnaud. I mean, the question, especially for Nicolina, what is the role of MDBs in tools and capacity building and all these areas that we've been talking about? Because in many ways, your role is slightly different in the sense that, much more action-oriented, technical assistance, and so forth. So yeah, over to you.
Thank you very much. I think, it's sort of interlinked with the answers to the previous question as well. And I think, working with client engagement and capacity building is key. Building strong linkages to universities and training at scale. So sort of that is interlinked to this. But also, I think we need to do a mental shift in not developing for, but rather developing with. So working more closely with clients, not only like passing over a project or a final product to the client in the end and doing a workshop and think that then we can leave and everything will work out fine, but we engage with the client from day one, or even like from day zero when we plan the project. So we plan a project with the client so that we assure that the project is demand driven. We work throughout with the client throughout the project to engage them so that we build strong engagement and buy-in from the client. And that will also, when we have done this in projects in the past, we have learned that we will also be, that will help our, for instance, the data collection process, because the client understand what the data will be used for and so forth. It may take a bit longer time, but I think that we as organizations need to think more long-term and allow the process to take a bit longer for the gain on the long-term horizon. So I think thank you.
Thank you, Nicolina. Arnaud.
Yeah, a few points on that. Maybe. Thanks. Yeah, can you hear me? Just to mention that this topic on technical assistance is really key, and we're trying to do a lot of measuring what's needed to be invested for clean energy transitions, for universal access to happen, and we usually focus on the investment needs for the infrastructure, for the capacity, etc. But I think we increasingly need to question ourselves on what amounts of soft intervention, including technical assistance, including some very specific grants, should be put on the table. Should we want all those trajectories to develop? But just other reactions, I really second on all that was said on involving academic free online tools. I think there is really a key point in co-building the programs, and maybe there is also something to question and to challenge on the way we are implementing those programs. Sometimes, and I guess it's based on donors specific programs, we have short milestone, short period to report on, and not time enough to co-build the programs with the beneficiaries. So maybe focusing more in the design phase of the program on ensuring we have time enough to make a proper inception could be a good point. And another point I'd like to make is we focus on planning, but we all know that if we don't have the good data in, we won't have anything good out. And something we always hear a lot from our counterparts in governments is that there is really a bit of fatigue on being asked the same data from all our organization, on being proposed to support capacity on planning from all of us. But I understand they feel like no one is really putting on the table the money or the focus, the effort which is required to get new, fresh data, support capacities on data collection, surveys, etc. So this might also be a blind spot we shall look more at.
Thank you, Arnaud. One final question to my colleagues in CCG. So what does success look like as far as we're concerned? How do we know we've been successful further down the line?
Right, I think there are maybe three things that are worth bearing in mind. The first is that there's an end game. We want to see investment in infrastructure, markets, activities, and so on, that both improve livelihoods and income in a way that reduces harmful environmental impact and so on. So we want to see that change in activity. That can relate to government budgets being spent on well-planned infrastructure, multi-donor bank loans being spent on well-planned infrastructure. It could also be about governments rearranging systems and regulations to encourage markets and inclusion and other things. So that's the end goal, and I think that's quite tangible, and it's really helpful. I think the second thing that is important is just to is to be able to make sure that supply and demand meet each other. The Energy Modeling Platform for Africa, which is one of 5 events of its kind, around 200 applicants were made. Each one of them came along with a letter from either government, Director General level, or academic superior saying that they want this stuff, they want access to this stuff inside of ministries or inside of academic programs. So demand is really high, which goes on to the third point, which I think is important, and that's where in partnership we can work together to create the tools and underlying pieces of the puzzle that are needed to put these things together. Now, those might be packaged differently for IRENA, for the IEA, for IAEA, for CCG, and so on, but there are aspects of those that we can all build on together, and we've started to. And these open university courses and data kits were developed by all of us in this group to answer exactly these types of questions that were brought up. And it's the very first time that there are data and model kits available for folk and governments to pick up and to translate into something that represents their national needs. And there'll be a part of the program working into the future will be to develop this data platform more. But 3 things. One, eye on the prize. We want to see empowered livelihoods. Secondly, we want to make sure that we're meeting very real demands and not overstepping there a little bit. And thirdly, to make sure that we're creating the kinds of enabling environment and public goods that people and organizations can continue to build together to create sensible products. One last thing I would like to just throw in, which is a new thing, and that is, and it picks up on Anna's point, and that is just the idea that as we build programs and engage, that knowledge management is incorporated in those from the get-go. So we think about when things are 10 years down the line, is the infrastructure in place to ensure that knowledge is sensibly curated and grown to meet and changed to meet the national needs? Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
I hope I didn't misrepresent that too badly, Jim.
No. Jim, did you have anything to add?
Just 2 things. One was the question asked about measurement. How do we measure the success? And I think that's incredibly difficult, actually. I mean, we can measure all sorts of outputs. We can measure numbers of models. We can measure number of people trained. We can even try and measure the impact of tools being used in national policy making. But it's hard to do. So a kind of plea, and it's almost addressed to our funders, this one, which is that even when CCG has packed up and gone home and had its impact, is you come back 5-10 years later and you talk to these governments that have been working with us, with the partners you've heard from in this session, and just say, what has that impact been? What is the enduring impact? And often you'll be in the business of telling stories rather than measuring numbers of X, Y, and Z. So I think that's really important. And it comes to the other side, which we haven't talked about as much in this session, which is that capacity not only in models, tools, scenarios, and quantification, but actually the capacity in terms of policy making. How do you design and develop energy strategies, individual policies and regulations to get the stuff built in the first place? And that, again, needs to be evaluated. And hopefully, over time, CCG is going to contribute to that capacity as well.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Just, I'd like to make a few points before I invite you in, I ask you to come in, Carla. I mean, I'm quite heartened at the fact that, Mark, you kicked off with a not an elaborate story, but a real story, and how the work of CCG and the work of everyone else here is going to need to connect, with people. That, at the end, we are, the whole idea is to try and transform people's livelihoods and conditions. And I think if we have that firmly in our minds, it's quite important target to keep in mind. I think, the issue of institutional capacity, this is something that many of us have been talking about for quite some time. The question is, how do you do it? And quite clearly, what we've heard today is that there are institutions, such as IAEA, IRENA, and others, who are actually doing this stuff. And so it's really building on much of that. Again, coordination has come as a centerpiece in all that we have discussed today. Coordination within, for example, data, but also the way in which data and modeling. How does that interact? Some of them are going to be data providers, and others are obviously expertise in modeling. But creating that synergy between different pieces of the puzzle is quite critical. And ultimately, partnership is quite fundamental, but also the quality of that partnership, again, in delivering those livelihoods benefits and the co-benefits as associated with low carbon transition, but also low carbon transition that has a development objective at the end of it. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much. And again, thank you to all our speakers here and others who are further away and you have chickened out not joining us in Glasgow, but that's okay. I hope you're all well. Anyway, so thank you.